But the point is that this is, yeah, it's a serious moment, and it's interesting that the Americans are showing so vociferously that they want to be part of any Israeli response if needs be. That, of course, is part of deterrence as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden has been, this week, openly critical of Israel's tactics in Gaza, but he has left us in no doubt at all about support vis-a-vis Iran. I mean, as you say, this comment isn't just aimed at reassuring Israel, is it? It's about telling Iran to back off.
Yeah, and it's also, yes, it is. It's telling Iran to back off because the Americans look at the escalating confrontation with Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon and other pro-Iranian groups as something rather different to Gaza, though I think most analysts of the region would say the whole thing is intimately connected. Certainly, it's something that I think they're all taking seriously. There's this American general coming over here, though there are reports that he was due to visit anyway in connection with the humanitarian efforts in Gaza. So yeah, it's to be taken seriously. I have to say, Iran tends to move in quite unexpected ways, and the suggestion that they might, almost by appointment, launch a missile strike directly on Israel in the teeth of these warnings from America, when the Iranians have made it very clear they do not want an all-out war in the Middle East. I think that's unlikely. I think they will respond, because they've said so often that they must, but it might not be the way that people are expecting it, nor indeed when.
Jeremy, thanks very much indeed. Jeremy Bowen, our international editor.
It is now 13 minutes past 7. New figures on waiting times in accident and emergency units in hospitals in England are out later this morning. It's clear that ministers expect them to show some much needed good news about what's happening in the NHS. Perhaps a forward number of patients waiting 4 hours to be seen. If that happens, it might be due in part to financial incentives to get those waiting times down. How they're working and do those stats tell us the whole story? Let's talk to the President of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, Dr. Adrian Boyle. Morning to you.
Good morning.
Are you anticipating some better signs of what's happening in A&E?
So I think we might see a small improvement in 4-hour target performance, which I think would be welcome, but we would be, small improvements from, in the low 70s to mid 70s is a little difficult to celebrate when we know that we have so many people staying for a very long stay.
By 70s, you're referring to the percentage of patients that don't have to wait 4 hours.
So the number of patients who are seen and either admitted or discharged within 4 hours for registration.
So there's still lots of people who will miss the target, in other words, and you're also concerned, aren't you, at the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, that some people wait a very long time indeed?
Yes, and one of the problems of having a target like this with a low threshold, because when the target was initially designed, it was set at 95%, and that applied to everyone. What we're seeing now is all the operational effort and attention is put on people who can be sent home. The people who need to be admitted end up staying a long time. Last year, 2023, 1.5 million people spent more than 12 hours from time of arrival in our emergency wards, and that's not good for them, it's too long.
Let's be clear what you're saying. I think you're saying that in order to get the numbers down, because they're politically embarrassing, what ends up happening is that there's an incentive, an actual financial incentive for hospitals to get the wellest patients out of A&E quickly, and that may allow the sickest patients to wait for more time.
Yes, this is creating an unintended consequence. The longer patients are stuck and still having these long stays.
On the other hand, if you're a politician, you might say, look, these things work. People, doctors in particular, often complain about targets, but when ministers say in this government, they used to say it under Labour governments as well, look, we'll set a target, we'll put a bit more effort in, we might put a little bit more money in, hey presto, things do get better quicker.
And we need a target. There's no doubt. We've tried an experiment where we actually didn't have a 4-hour target, and in the hospitals which had that, it was really difficult. So, and we can still see that the hospitals that took part in the pilot, where they didn't have a 4-hour target, to see what happened, they ended up at long stays. But the longer stays actually ended up being on the worst patients. The problem by setting the target so low is you actually create this very uneven playing field with lots of attention on people with cut fingers, sprained ankles, and not nearly the right level of operational attention on people with strokes and heart attacks who need to be admitted into hospital.
So what's your overview about where we are now with the NHS? The Prime Minister yesterday said things are slowly starting to get better. Is that how it seems to you?
So we still think it's very difficult in emergency care. We always expect to see a bit of improvement as we go into, as we come out of winter. There is a bit of improvement. Stuff around same-day emergency care is better, and we welcome that. But we still haven't got it right about these long stays of people being needed to be admitted to hospital.
Dr. Adrian Boyd, President of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, thank you.
We have just slipped past 17 minutes past 7. There's a warning from one of Thames Water's creditors that nationalising the UK's biggest water company could mean other providers lose out on investment. Will's back with more on this.
Yeah, that's right, Johnny. This, of course, has been up for discussion, hasn't it, because of the trouble with Thames Water's operating company, Kemble, in real financial difficulty. You know, recently it failed to pay interest on a £400 million worth of debt, and also announced that it won't be able to make a £190 million loan repayment due at the end of this month. Royal London Asset Management holds bonds in Thames' operating company, Kemble, and Shalin Shah is a senior fund manager at Royal London. Shalin, morning.
Good morning.
First of all, just explain this through for people so they know what we're talking about here. Thames basically sells bonds to companies like you, and you get a return from them over time.
Yes, that's right. So Thames Water, like a lot of other water companies, fund their essential investments in improving the network through not only debt investments but also equity investments, and these are long-term in nature.
And your concern here is what?
So the concern that we have at the present time is that as a regulated water company, any shift in political sentiment that ultimately, you know, at the present time remains quite heightened in terms of political risks, any shift that ultimately could lead to a less stable regulatory regime could impact investment across the wider UK water sector, the wider UK infrastructure.
And by that, you're talking about, say, like a quasi-nationalisation, so the government having to step in if Thames's current shareholders and creditors don't, you know, if it can't keep going through their support, the government might have to step in and support it financially.
So it really depends on how, if it does step in and how it steps in. I think the key issue is around undermining the established concept of a stable regulatory regime, because long-term investors are relying on this stability to enable further investment, and that investment is much needed at the present time.
Should those investors be the priority, though? What about the 16 million customers who might see their bills up by 40%, which would be the other option on the table?
Yes, so that is the heightened political risk I mentioned earlier, which is around really finding the balance between maintaining affordability on customer bills with...
I mean, is that possible? With you guys not losing out on your investment? I mean, is that possible? Is that a balancing act that can be done?
So the regulatory regime that is in place does allow bill rises to effectively allow the network to operate, but your question is it possible to not allow bill rises? Now that is a key challenge, because Thames Water is not alone. All the water companies are asking for significant...
Claimed that the Labour government could deliver more buses and more bus routes without spending any extra money. In the next hour, the Health Secretary about the Tory promise to cut taxes, even though the government's missing its targets to resolve the NHS crisis. I've been speaking to a former Chancellor about this big question, Philip Hammond. He says that neither big party is now being open about the pressures they're going to face, not just day-to-day demands to spend more, but what he refers to as the 3 Ds: the demographic challenge, decarbonisation and defence. In other words, the problems of an ageing population, a warming planet and an increasingly unsafe world. I've been speaking to Hammond for the latest edition of the Today podcast, which asks a simple question: where will the money come from?
We now live in a world where tax is very high, record levels, borrowing is at very high, indeed record levels, and yet we face some very large and structural challenges on the public spending and public finances front.
Do we need a more honest conversation then?
The challenge with the more honest conversation in a democracy is, as all politicians know, voters don't want to hear this. They want politicians to resolve it for them. They want politicians to find a way around it. And so politicians either focus on the economic solution, which is a productivity revolution, or they focus on things like improving efficiency of public services at the margin, or collecting a bit more tax from people who perhaps are not paying as much as they should be. I think the real issue here is to get the public to engage with the opportunity of technological innovation across the economy being a way of raising our productivity game. But the truth is, we haven't done very well on productivity for quite a number of years, certainly since the global financial crisis.
Beware, the former Chancellor is telling you, of anyone who tells you that you can pay for promises simply by cracking down on tax avoidance or more efficiency. Now, Philip Hammond was kicked out of the Conservative Party by Boris Johnson for defying him over Brexit. He is now back and sitting in the House of Lords, though he has a busy business career. Does he, I asked him, look at his party's low poll ratings and see a crisis looming?
To be honest with you, Nick, and I am a former politician, I don't think of myself as being involved in the day-to-day political debate anymore. I think the formidable problem is for our democratic politics, because I can easily envisage, and the polls are certainly suggesting, that the Conservative Party will take a pasting at the next election. But do I think that the Labour Party has a magic bullet that will solve all the problems we've been talking about today? Not at all. And they too will have to deal with this excruciating problem of ever rising demand for ordinary public spending, and then on top of it the need to decarbonise and to rearm the country in the face of big existential threats.
That's just part of a much longer conversation with Philip Hammond. It's on this week's edition of the Today podcast. I know we're at risk of banging on about these podcasts, and some people don't listen to any at all. They're just radio programmes you can get on your phone. I mean, that's no more complicated than that. Just enhances your choice, gives you some chance for a longer conversation, perhaps a more reflective conversation than you sometimes get on newspaper.
I mean, you've just got Philip Hammond to acknowledge that Conservatives are facing a pasting. But there's that more serious point, isn't there? That's that point that echoing, I think it was a Luxembourg Prime Minister said, we all know how to reform our countries, we just don't know how to get elected afterwards.
It's a great quote, isn't that? It's a great quote. I should have put that to Philip Hammond. You should present those programmes. You'll have to deal with the kind of merely inadequate version of that interview on BBC Sounds. That's where you get the Today podcast.
It is 24 minutes past 7.
Now, a once daily pill to treat migraines has been approved for use in England by the health spending watchdog NICE. How significant is that for tens of thousands of migraine sufferers? The pill is already in use in Scotland. The Conservative MP Dahina Davison gave up her role as a minister because of migraine attacks. She told MPs in a debate about the condition last month, and she spoke about its life-ruining impact.
Migraine is not just a headache. Migraine is a complex neurological spectrum condition for which headache is just one possible symptom. So this is a very strong early message to anyone suggesting you can cure a migraine attack with a couple of paracetamol. It's time to learn, and it is time to be better.
Well, let's talk to Rob Music, who's Chief Executive of the Migraine Trust. Morning to you, Rob. Just spell out what Dahina was trying to say there, would you? There are people who just think it's a bit of a bad headache.
Absolutely right, and I think it's a huge stigma that has got to be quashed as soon as possible. It is much more than a headache. It's a severe and painful long-term neurological condition. Headache is a major feature, but there are many other symptoms, from disturbed vision, sensitivity to light, sounds, smells, feeling sick, being sick. It's worst case, it completely destroys quality of life. You have breakdown of social relationships, you can't work, financially you're massively impacted, and people just literally have nowhere to go. And that's why it's very positive to hear that NICE have approved a new treatment that hopefully will support people who live with chronic and episodic migraine.
You say hopefully. How important is this once a day pill? How many people is it likely to be able to help?
So the estimation is that it could potentially help around 170,000 people. I mean, there are 10 million people who live with migraine, and 1 million people who are chronic. So this is the estimation.
So it's not everybody, to be clear, and indeed I think you have to be prescribed it in hospital rather than by your own GP. Is that right?
With this particular one, yes. So, and you can't just give it straight away. So you would have to have failed 3 other preventive treatments first before you were eligible for this one.
So this is at the end of the pathway for a patient. This isn't like reaching for a paracetamol or an aspirin.
Absolutely, and that's the way it is at the moment. I know there are conversations about should treatments like this be almost first line rather than end line, rather than being offered, because historically, before this and similar treatments that are available, the treatments that were for other conditions such as epilepsy, depression, people offered beta blockers, quite nasty side effects. So that's why this is very important. I think the important thing also is it's very positive that we've got this announcement. We've got to make sure that for people who are eligible, that they are offered it as soon as they possibly can have it. So the Migraine Trust produced a report last year that showed there's a huge postcode lottery around people being able to access these treatments if they're eligible. And we want to see that inequity stopped as soon as possible, because what's the point in having a fantastic life-changing treatment if people can't access it?
Rob Music, Chief Executive of the Migraine Trust, thanks for joining us.
It's 28 minutes past 7. Still with us, Gary Richardson with the Sports News.
Johnny, Nick, good morning to you. One of sport's greatest events, the Masters Golf Tournament, is scheduled to start at 1 o'clock today. And I've been chatting about it to our correspondent Ian Carter.
Scotty Scheffler is the hot favourite after the form that he's shown this year. There is the enduring question of Rory McIlroy. This is his 10th attempt to try and complete the career Grand Slam, become only the 6th golfer to win all 4 of the majors. He got a big boost this week from Tiger Woods, who said undoubtedly Rory McIlroy is going to be a Masters champion one day, and this was McIlroy's reaction to that assertion from Tiger Woods.
It's flattering. It's nice to hear, in my opinion, the best player ever to play the game say something like that. So does that mean that it's going to happen? Obviously not, but you know, he's been around the game long enough to know that I at least have the potential to do it. And I mean, I know I've got the potential to do it too. It's not as if I haven't been a pretty good player for the last couple of decades. So, but yeah, it's nice to hear it when it comes out of his mouth.
And Ian, what about Woods himself, with all the injuries he's had and operations? Can he actually mount a serious challenge himself?
Well, you've asked him, he says yes, if it all comes together, he believes he could win a record equaling 6th green jacket. I think, in all honesty, it's a pretty fanciful notion when you consider that he hasn't completed a PGA Tour event since withdrawing through injury in the 3rd round of the Masters last year. And, you know, when you listen to him these days, it's that enduring relationship, the deepness of that he has with this sport that is most striking.
I love golf. I do. I've always loved it. I'd love to compete. I think that's one of the reasons why I've had a successful career. I just love doing the work, logging the time in, and I love preparing, I love competing, and I love that feeling when everything is on fire with a chance to win, and you either do or you don't.
So who are you actually expecting to win?
Well, I think that Scotty Scheffler is a very, very justifiable short odds favourite. The question for me is how the LIV players are going to perform. You look at the likes of Jon Rahm, who'll be the defending champion, who has only played this diet of 54-hole golf this year. And then you look at Rory McIlroy, and you just wonder. Here's a little teaser for you, Gary. Rory McIlroy was the last player to sign in here. The caddy number is attributed to the point at which you sign in. That caddy number is number 89. What year was Rory McIlroy born in? 89. What number did the caddy bibs have for Sergio Garcia and Danny Willett's wins? 89. You just wonder in the 88th Masters, don't you?
You do. Let's hope he doesn't come 89th. 5 Live Sports Extra with Ian and the team. Commentary from 8 o'clock. The weather forecast for the day, I'm afraid, isn't very encouraging. Ipswich missed their chance to go top of the championship after drawing 0-0 with Watford. Barcelona are nicely on course for the semi-finals of the Champions League after a 3-2 win in Paris against PSG. Atletico Madrid defeated Borussia Dortmund 2-1. An interesting story ahead of this summer's Olympics. World Athletics have announced that they'll award £40,000 to athletes who win gold medals in Paris. We'll have more in an hour. As we previewed earlier, it's the start of the Grand National Race Meeting. Our entry selections for the feature race at 5 minutes to 3. Number 6, it's a horse called Shishkin. And then at 4:05, look out for number 12. It's On the Line.
Gary, thank you very much indeed. Now, is there any connection between Gary announcing that he will one day leave us and that Emma Barnett is about to arrive on the programme? You're both here in studio.
Too true.
Answer. Emma, morning to you. Just tell us what you're doing for the moment, Julie.
Well, we'll stick with that, yes, because it is my last day presenting Woman's Hour before I join this mighty programme next month, and it's fair to say we've got quite a programme planned. I'll be catching up with one of the most remarkable women I've had the privilege of speaking to on Woman's Hour. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe will be in the studio. I'll also be marking the 90th birthday of the legendary American feminist, writer and journalist and trailblazing campaigner, all of those things. Gloria Steinem's on the programme and getting her take on reproductive rights, working with those you disagree with, and the power of community when it comes to the women's movement, and also getting her take on why America still hasn't had a female president. And as if that wasn't enough, we will have live music from the soulful wonder that is Rebecca Ferguson. So I would love for you to join me for my final Woman's Hour at 10 o'clock.
Emma, that may just be an emotional moment. The last show.
It may. I may have already tried to get it out this morning, and so I have my game face on now. But I think when Rebecca Ferguson starts singing, it may all go to mud.
Good luck with that.
Thanks, Emma.
Enjoy it soon.
Very best of luck with the last show, Emma. Let's take a quick look at the weather. Sunny in the north today, cloudier with showers in the south. Rain for some in the west come the evening. You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Nick Robinson and Johnny Diamond. It's 27 minutes to 8. Let's get a summary of the news with Alan Smith.
President Biden has promised ironclad support for Israel if the country's interests are targeted by Iran. He was speaking after Iran's supreme leader repeated that Israel would be punished for last week's airstrike on Tehran's consulate in Damascus, when 7 members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard were killed. American media say a US general will visit Israel today to discuss the situation. A 25-year-old man is to appear in court charged with the murder of a woman who was stabbed to death as she pushed her baby in a pram in Bradford on Saturday. Habiba Massoum is accused of killing Kulsum Akhtar, who was 27. The Home Secretary James Cleverly is coming under pressure from homeless charities to rethink plans to clamp down on what he describes as nuisance rough sleeping in England and Wales. He wants police to have the power to move on rough sleepers and issue a fine or arrest them. A letter signed by 37 charities says the measure risks stigmatising people who are forced to spend the night on the streets. South Korea's Liberal Opposition Party has won a landslide majority in the parliamentary election. The Democratic Party and its allies have secured 192 of 300 seats. The result is a crushing defeat for President Yoon Suk-yeol and his People Power Party. A court in Vietnam is to announce its verdict on one of the world's biggest bank fraud trials. The property tycoon Truong My Lan and 85 other defendants are accused of swindling billions of dollars from the Saigon Commercial Bank. If found guilty, she could face the death penalty. A new pill to treat migraines could soon become available on the NHS in England. The watchdog NICE says atogepant should be offered to people who have at least 4 migraine days a month and have tried at least 3 other treatments to no avail. And archaeologists excavating in the Roman city of Pompeii have uncovered stunning artworks in a villa. The walls of the property's large banqueting room are decorated with frescoes from Greek myths, while the floors are covered in mosaics.
Alan, thank you. It's 25 minutes to 8 now. Two things are striking about the overnight news coming from the Middle East. First, the belief coming from US intelligence sources that an attack on Israel by Iran is imminent. Second, the fears that Iran may launch a direct attack on Israel in retaliation for the killing of its commanders in Syria last week, rather than using a proxy, say Hezbollah in Lebanon, to launch an attack on Israeli interests elsewhere in the region. Last night, President Biden tried to send a message to Tehran to pull back by promising what he called ironclad support for Israel.
They're threatening to launch a significant attack on Israel. As I told Prime Minister Netanyahu, our commitment to Israel's security against these threats from Iran and its proxies is ironclad. Let me say it again, ironclad. We're going to do all we can to protect Israel's security.
I've been speaking to a man the President knows well, Ben Rhodes, who was Deputy National Security Advisor under President Obama. I asked him what it would mean if there were a direct attack by Iran on Israel.
I think that would be a major escalation. I mean, we've seen Iran and Israel trading these attacks in third countries, but we have not seen Iran take a direct shot at Israel. And given the already volatile situation, it is almost certain that Israel would feel compelled to attack Iranian soil in response. And now we don't know exactly what's going to happen, and it's possible that Iran could attack, say, an Israeli diplomatic facility, which in its view I think would be in reprisal for the attack on the sovereign Iranian diplomatic facility in Syria. But if it is on Israel's territory, I think we can expect an Israeli attack on Iranian territory.
And if that happened, we'd expect US support for that.
Well, yes, I think, you see in President Biden's comments today a desire to send a message, but I think that message is first and foremost an effort to deter Iran from taking action. I'm sure that US officials are pressing any country that has a line into the Iranians to get them to de-escalate and to avoid that kind of direct confrontation. I think the U.S. would want to avoid and should avoid getting involved directly in attacks on Iranian soil. And look, I mean, this entire situation in the Middle East has been far too violent. And these are the kinds of things that happen when you have not just the war in Gaza, but you have these kind of ongoing proxy wars across the region. I think the U.S. has to find a pathway to try to support a de-escalation here because the current course is not good for anybody, and it's not good for U.S. interests either.
President Biden's critics might say, look, it's because the US looked weak in its support for Israel that Iran is going to take its chances.
No, I mean, frankly, I'd come at it from the other direction, which is that the support that the U.S. has provided, and President Biden provided, over many months of the Israeli attacks in Gaza and this kind of ongoing proxy war between Israel and Iran, this is what happens. This is where conflict leads. When you've had attacks back and forth in Syria and Iraq and across the region between the U.S. and Israel and Iranian proxies, and you've obviously had the massive military operation in Gaza, this is a tinderbox, and if you continue to throw matches in a tinderbox, it can explode in unpredictable ways. And so I don't think that it's a symptom of the United States becoming more critical of what's happening in Gaza. This is a direct outcome of the Israeli attack on an Iranian diplomatic facility in Syria, which again is a reprisal for Iranian support for proxies that attack Israel. I mean, it's been a tit for tat.
Indeed, but Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has argued for years, hasn't he, that Israel's real war is not with the Palestinians but with Iran. And there are some in Israel who think that this conflict with Iran, particularly in the north of Israel against Hezbollah, cannot be put off.
Well, but I think he's been wrong in his approach over the years. And frankly, we've seen him tolerate, support getting in to Hamas in Gaza over the years. We've seen him, essentially undermine and compel, President Trump to withdraw from Iranian nuclear deal that had put a lid on the nuclear program. Obviously, I was involved in that. At some point, you either are going to do this through war or through some diplomacy and de-escalation. And I worry that for Israel's own interests, having the region continue to cascade in this direction of conflict is not good. There are real problems with Iran's support for these proxy groups. There are real challenges to Israel's security from Hezbollah, from obviously Hamas, and challenges to U.S. interests in places like Iraq as well from Iran's support for proxies. The question is, are you better able to address that in a kind of ongoing shadow war, or do you need to mix that with some diplomacy to de-escalate? And I think you need both pressure and you need some off-ramps here, or else we're just going to be on a road to conflict.
Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Obama, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Nick.
It's 19 minutes to 8. Let's take another look at the papers. And The Guardian has a story, looks like as a result of a Freedom of Information request from its political editor, Pippa Creer, that Rishi Sunak ordered multiple taxpayer-funded focus groups and polls to craft the messaging of his Eat Out to Help Out campaign in July 2020. It says that the Whitehall departments involved resisted efforts to get the details of the focus groups and polls, but were ordered to do so by the Information Commissioner. 184 individual focus groups carried out over the course of the first 4 contracts. All this, of course, while Rishi Sunak was Chancellor rather than Prime Minister. The Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner is quoted accusing Rishi Sunak of using the research to polish his own image. The Treasury has always said it's justified by ministers as an essential expenditure to shape policy.
Another intriguing story that makes it on the front page of the Times, its story that Joe Haynes, former press secretary to Harold Wilson, reveals that the former Prime Minister did have an affair. It was often rumoured, but not with the person that anyone, including Wilson's biographers, knew about. I've been speaking to Joe Haynes, his close ally, the former political secretary to the former Prime Minister, Bernard, now Lord Donahue, who's head of Wilson's policy unit, about that affair, about his decision and Joe Haynes' decision to keep it secret for half a century. We'll hear the full interview in the next hour, but listen now as Lord Donahue describes to me how Wilson, in his inimitable fashion, confirmed his relationship with a woman called Janet Hewlett-Davis during a private conversation.
Towards the end, because he had a lot of time on his hands, he used to take me for walks around number 10 to have a little gossip. On one such walk, he, in a very Wilsonian way, because he wasn't a very direct person, he said he was very pleased I was a friend of Janet. So I, knowing him, know that he wouldn't have raised that unless he'd got some interest or concern. So I knew that he was asking me, did I know about him and Janet? And I replied by saying I thought Janet was a lovely and terrific person. And I then added, in a Wilsonian way, which I had learned from him, and I'm very pleased your relationship is so close and so good. And that way I let him know that I knew. And then he said that she was a lovely person and he'd never been happier.
But that was enough. You understood the code. The code was he was in an affair and he was very happy.
Yeah, that was the code. But with Harold, it was often codes.
Why did you keep it secret for so long, and why reveal it now?
Well, we kept it secret because we thought it would be used damagingly against them at that time. There's no reason for that now. And we waited until they both died. Wilson some time ago, and Janet just a few months ago. And also, I felt, as a sometime historian, this was important to go in the historical record of Wilson.
Important because it tells us what, Lord Donahue? What do we learn beyond the fact that Harold Wilson had an affair with someone much younger than him, and that brought him happiness in his last years in Downing Street?
Well, that last bit is what matters. This was a little sunshine at sunset she obviously made him finally happy, which I had never seen him happy.
Sunshine at sunset is a lovely phrase. You see why he did the job he did, Bernard Donahue, for all those years. Of course, what everyone talked about during Wilson's time in Downing Street, pretty much ever since, is whether the former Prime Minister had an affair with his political secretary, very powerful woman, Marcia Williams, later Marcia Faulkner. They confirmed that affair, at least according to Faulkner, did happen 20 years before this affair. More of that interview later.
Open-mouthed. It is 7:45. If you thought the Roman city of Pompeii, frozen in time after a volcanic eruption engulfed its inhabitants and, of course, preserved its buildings, if you thought it had yielded up all its secrets, then think again. The excavation of a previously undiscovered part of the city has revealed not just stunning artworks and ornate mosaics, but a very grand banqueting hall, a so-called Black Room in one of the villas. Let's get the first word on this from Gabriel Zugtriga, archaeologist and director of Pompeii Archaeological Park. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
Could you tell me first of all about the villa that you've been working at?
Well, I'm actually standing in this room, which is part of a bigger excavation to restore and preserve the site better in the future. And it's almost as big as a classroom you can imagine. It has a white floor, mosaic floor, and black walls. This was because they had dining parties in the evenings, and they had lamps, and the smoke should not have been seen on the walls, so they just painted them in black. And they had also some beautiful scenes from Greek myth painted on these black walls.
So the walls are black to cover up what might have been sort of smoke pollution, but you can still see very clearly the paintings which those dining would have been resting their eyes and enjoying themselves with.
And it's on one side, it's the god Apollo, the oracle god of music, with Cassandra, who could see the future but could not change it. Nobody believed her, so it's a terrible fate, and she would be then raped during the invasion of the